Hey, it's Michael Douglas. Welcome back to Dr. Pundit, where we talk about music, not medicine. And on this show, I ask the eternal question, do you really like grunge? Michael Douglas here on Dr. Pundit. Thanks for joining me today. And I want to talk about three grunge albums from the early to mid 1990s that still pack a punch today. I'm not the biggest grunge fan, but I'm more enamored of the reason for its existence. That causes me to listen to it. I mean, it was this answer to all the hair bands and the 80s metal that just really lost its way and wasn't speaking to, at that time, I guess people nowadays, it would be the older millennials, I guess, the mid to older millennials, those people who were born in the early 1980s, who were just getting into rock music. By the time the early 90s rolled around, they were between 10 and 15 years of age. And bands like Cinderella and Rat and even Bon Jovi and Guns N' Roses really weren't doing it for them. Bands like Nirvana, which spearheaded the movement, Soundgarden, those are the two bands I talk about today, certainly led the way and led the charge. And so how could I not? So yes, I can listen to grunge. I don't necessarily call it a favorite. So let's get into those three albums. And I'll start with my favorite. And this is a band who was introduced to me by a friend when I was in medical school. And I went out and bought their debut album. I'm talking about Soundgarden. And did you know that Soundgarden was the first grunge band to get a Grammy nomination? And in 1994, they put out what I think is the quintessential grunge band. But, you may not want to stop with me because I'm not, again, a grunge connoisseur, but I listened to enough of it to where I think I can come up with a list like this, okay? So give me some credit. That 1994 album was called Super Unknown, and it featured smashes like Spoon Man, Fell on Black Days, and my personal favorite, Black Hole Sun, which had a kick-ass video. But intermixed among these driving tracks are tracks like The Day I Tried to Love and My Wave. These are much more sublime tracks that I think, dare I say, balance out this album by Soundgarden. This band on this album showed real rock prowess, balanced out by a delicate sensibility to melody and delivery. A solid 1994 offering by this band, and my favorite grunge album if I had to choose one. Now, the next two albums were from the band Nirvana, perhaps the most influential band of the era. The third and final album from this band is one I'll talk about right now. It's called In Utero. It's loud, it's chainsaw buzzy, it's full of screams, and a lot of Nirvana purists would somehow put this album between, say, Nevermind and, say, Bleach. But it's got some softer songs too, if that's the way you want to call it. A track that stands out is a track called Dumb. There's also Pennyroyal Tea. And again, I think, if anything, this album serves as a final farewell, of course. And perhaps the band really kind of knew this on some level before they released it, because it does stand on its own, and I think it's a cap, a studio album cap to all of their studio output, Nirvana and In Utero. Of course, the death of Kurt Cobain was a big influence on bringing a lot of newer people, including myself, into the fold. And I remember when Nevermind came out, I really wasn't interested, but it's funny how death really brings out curiosities in some people, some fans, and I have to admit that, full disclosure. And I would say that their MTV Unplugged album was a worthy successor to In Utero after Kurt Cobain had died. Of course, this album showcases the band in a more natural state. It came out a little bit more than 6 months after Cobain had died. And it was just, I think, that raw kind of presentation, that organic presentation, that certainly drew me to it. This album showed the band interacting with each other, joking with each other. You really got a sense of them doing sessions while recording this album. I would say out of all three of these albums, Super Unknown, In Utero, and Nirvana's MTV Unplugged album, this one is probably the one I like the least, but it does offer a smattering of original tracks and newer tracks for the time and makes it a quite compelling listen. So I'll just give a brief example of the smattering of tracks on the album. So the tracks say About a Girl and All Apologies. So they're own songs aside from, say, covers of, say, Leadbelly's Where Did You Sleep Last Night? So again, this album really, I think, has a really fun mix. And again, it's a compelling listen that I would listen from beginning to end as the artist intended the order of tracks in this album to be heard. So two albums by Nirvana, In Utero and MTV Unplugged, which I think kind of showcase the band in a raw, organic nature, and with In Utero, a fitting farewell to this band. And of course, Soundgarden's Super Unknown, terrific album. So if you've never, or if you've heard of grunge, I think these are three albums to really kind of look at first and go from there, I suppose. So Michael Douglas here. If you like what you see on the channel, please don't hesitate to like and subscribe. And as the late great Barry White always used to say, let the music play, and I'll see you on the next episode.